The James Bond we know from the movies is bulletproof, but the Bond Ian Fleming wrote was a man who suffered from burnout, doubted his career, and felt trapped by his own job. Today, we're cracking the code on why the broken James Bond is actually the hero we can relate to today. Hi, this is Dan.
And Tom.
And welcome back to Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. Today, we're going to quickly look at the Fleming novels, the classic movie version, and the modern world we live in now.
Yeah, now wait until you see how the novel version of Casino Royale handles the famous torture scene with Le Chiffre and Bond. It's nothing like the quips we see in the movie.
Yeah. The gap between James Bond and Ian Fleming's Bond is much bigger than most people realize.
Oh, that's true. I mean, we have to remember, Ian Fleming's James Bond smoked too much. He worried about aging and death. He got depressed. He doubted himself. He made mistakes. And perhaps most surprisingly, he often seemed exhausted or even trapped by the various jobs he's famous for.
Yeah, but here's the strange thing. James Bond is one of the most recognizable characters in movie history. When most people think of James Bond, they picture the movie version. The tuxedo, Aston Martin, gadgets, vodka martinis, impossible escapes, and a man who seems emotionally bulletproof. In other words, they think of the movie James Bond.
Well, that's me.
In a world today of burnout, surveillance, anxiety, and emotional isolation, Ian Fleming's version of Bond may actually feel more relatable today than this polished cinematic version of the super spy.
Yeah, I mean, the Bond most people know was born on the big screen.
Yeah.
The cinematic Bond was born in Dr. No in 1962, and he almost immediately became larger than life.
Yeah.
With Sean Connery's cool physical confidence, his sexual magnetism, there was a sense that Bond was always the smartest person in the room. I mean, in the movies, Bond rarely doubts himself. He walks into danger with style, he defeats villains through competence, and usually he ends the movie in control.
As the series evolved, though, Bond became more, he became increasingly mythic. Roger Moore turned him
I like that.
Yeah, Roger Moore kind of turned him into this suave adventurer with charm and still with plenty of wit and that kind of thing. Pierce Brosnan blended elegance with blockbuster spectacle and polished sophistication. And then you get to Daniel Craig, even his grittier version of James Bond still operates in a world of extraordinary competence and cinematic determination or even destiny. That cinematic version became a fantasy of seemingly effortless mastery. And that's what we got used to watching James Bond on the screen.
But that's
Mastery.
not how Fleming wrote him.
Yeah, but mastery over danger, mastery over technology, mastery over emotion. Of course, we have beautiful locations, luxury, sexual confidence, precise actions, and clear moral victories. And that fantasy became the brand for Bond.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the movie James Bond, and I think in this episode we're going to go back and forth between movie Bond and book Bond. So
Okay.
the movie James Bond became an aspiration.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Fleming's Bond was something else entirely because Fleming's Bond was never that comfortable in his own skin.
Okay, so that makes me ask the question then, since we're Spy Movie Navigator cracking the code of spy movies, who is the book James Bond then?
Ian Fleming's Bond, introduced, of course, in Casino Royale in 1953, is not a superhero. Fleming himself said that Bond was not a hero and that he did not write Bond to be likable. We have a whole video on that on our YouTube channel. In Casino Royale, he's introduced as a professional killer who happens to work for British intelligence. He is competent, yeah, but he's also weary, solitary, and emotionally damaged. You read the books, you feel that when you read this in Fleming's novels. Fleming
Yeah, you don't really get that in the movies.
Not a lot. I mean, they started a little bit with Craig and so on, but no, you don't get a lot. I mean, Fleming repeatedly emphasizes Bond's physical limitations. He gets injured badly sometimes. He recovers slowly. He drinks excessively, and he worries about his body failing him. In short, he's a damaged professional, or actually like a real human being. I mean,
It wasn't just that he was tired.
no.
In the original Casino Royale book, Bond doesn't just walk away from that torture with a quip. He has a full scale psychological collapse. I mean, he's human and
Yeah.
he breaks there.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. But in the Fleming novels, Bond smokes too much. He drinks heavily. He sleeps poorly. He's suspicious of people, emotionally guarded, and deeply aware that his job is destroying him. Well, say yow. All right. Fleming repeatedly
Hey,
emphasizes.
wait, Dan, when I worked for you, I didn't smoke, but I think I might have drank too heavily. I slept poorly.
Yeah.
I was emotionally.
Wait a
I
minute.
think I was James Bond.
Yeah, I think you are too. All right. Fleming repeatedly emphasizes Bond's physical and psychological wear. He feels fear before missions. He questions whether his work has meaning. He longs for ordinary human connection. He is a lonely man. In Casino Royale, he suffers psychological collapse after torture. I mean, all of this is happening in the book Bond.
Yeah, and in the novel version of From Russia with Love, James Bond spends long stretches simply doing surveillance work and
Yeah,
worrying about whether he's walking into a trap. He survives more through endurance and luck than effortless superiority, which is different than the movies.
yeah. And in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
You're talking about the novel, right?
The novel, yeah. In that novel, James Bond seriously considers leaving the service altogether. That a lot of the movies, and it's kinda, played off a lot, but in this novel, he's seriously looking at
He seemed to do that a lot.
it. Yeah, certainly in the movies he did. And then in the novel Moonraker, he's exhausted and cynical about post-war Britain. He reflects on aging and whether younger agents are overtaking him.
Okay, so Fleming's James Bond is not invincible, or book James Bond is not invincible.
Right.
Maybe we could say that he's functional and very competent. And
Yeah.
there's a huge difference between those ideas. And this competence comes with a cost.
Yeah. And the cost is what makes him feel modern. We aren't just watching a spy, we're watching someone deal with the same pressures that we feel today. So
Yeah.
the key difference is control versus vulnerability. Think about it this way: the biggest difference between movie Bond and book Bond is this: movie Bond projects control, book Bond reveals vulnerability. Movie Bond
Yeah.
often appears emotionally armored, and they make a big point of that in these movies. Even when he suffers loss, the story tends to move him quickly back into action. Fleming's Bond lingers in discomfort. He worries about aging, like we said. He worries about relevance. He worries about intimacy. He notices his own loneliness. That vulnerability changes how we experience the character. Movie Bond says, I can handle anything. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Daniel Craig's Bond brought us back to the Fleming Bond because everything you just said about Fleming's Bond is what we saw out of James Bond in the Craig movies. And I think one reason Fleming's Bond feels so modern, though, is that he doubts himself constantly.
Yeah. That's almost absent from the classic Bond movies.
Oh, yeah, the classic James Bond movies, or maybe we should say the pre Daniel Craig James Bond,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
even Timothy Dalton's Bond, while grittier and a bit closer to the Fleming Bond, didn't display all these traits you're talking about. Yes,
Yikes.
Dalton got rid of the comedic stuff we saw, especially from Roger Moore and what we get in Pierce Brosnan. So even though Dalton's Bond was gritty, he didn't have us all the way back to Fleming's Bond, which I think Daniel Craig actually did.
Yeah, Craig, I think, got pretty close, and I think they intentionally did that to make it a little bit more like Fleming's Bond. And people in general, I think, like Daniel Craig's movies. Or at least they like Casino Royale They like Skyfall.
They sure bought a lot of tickets.
Yeah. So Fleming's book Bond, though, he questions himself. Am I getting too old? Is this job destroying me? Can I trust my instincts? He even thinks that way. And what does loyalty actually really mean? Like in the novel Casino Royale, after falling in love with Vesper Lynd, Bond is shattered by betrayal. He doesn't shrug it off with a quip. He spirals down emotionally and redefines his worldview around the famous line, "The bitch is dead now."
Yeah,
Uh,
that line is brutal. But I mean, it's also revealing. Bond's trying to shield
yeah,
himself emotionally because he's been hurt
right.
and he's good at putting up shields.
Yeah,
And he's been getting better and better emotional armor to wear, putting up these shields. He feels that protects him emotionally.
yeah. And that's the thing I think that we have to look at here is this emotional armor that he uses brilliantly in the novels. Modern audiences understand emotional damage in a way that 1960s blockbuster cinema rarely allowed male heroes to express and understand. So people get that now, and it's okay to feel that now in the real world. In the early 60s, they weren't going to show that in these movies. So,
Okay, but you said this a couple times now about this way he's projected. Why does Ian Fleming's James Bond feel different than the modern Bond now?
Fleming wrote during the Cold War, but many of his themes feel uncannily contemporary right now.
Yeah.
Look at
Well,
Burnout.
we have an episode on that talking about how today mirrors a lot of these books.
Yeah, exactly. All right, look at burnout and exhaustion. Book Bond is chronically overworked and emotionally depleted. Today, conversations about burnout are everywhere. Fleming's world is full of hidden watchers, compromised institutions. Remember, morality is gray. It's not black and white. And there's a
That's
lot of
true.
uncertain loyalties, right? Modern life with digital surveillance, data tracking, political distrust everywhere, it often feels similarly paranoid. Very close today as it was when Fleming was writing.
Well, and I
That's it.
think it's actually amped up more now because
Okay.
think about how many news stories are of people getting caught doing something wrong because they were caught on a surveillance camera. They
Yeah,
didn't know the camera was there or they forgot. Or
always.
this is one of my favorite ones is people caught by a favorite divorce lawyer trick using data tracking to identify that someone was cheating on their spouse.
Yeah.
Initially, they would look at toll records, and now with GPS and everything, they know where you've been.
Yeah.
And
All right. And
and then
so a lot of this again connects back to what Fleming was writing. And then you
yeah,
have Bond's concept of this whole concept of emotional isolation. Bond struggles to form lasting relationships because his identity is tied to performance and secrecy and accomplishing his mission, which includes killing.
yeah. Oh,
A little
doesn't
pressure on
yours,
your
Stan?
in an era of curated online personas and fragmented social connections like we see today on all the social media stuff, that isolation resonates more strongly than it did in the optimistic 1960s. People today connect in different ways, but less meaningful ways. Social media life is not a substitute for real life.
Yeah, and if you look at On Her Majesty's Secret Service, we really can see James Bond struggling between the professional life and the personal life. In this movie, we need to look at the scene in the barn where James Bond proposes to Tracy.
What really went on up there, James?
Her Majesty's Secret Service is still my job.
Bond can't develop the relationship with Tracy as well as he probably should because of this secrecy. And it's a problem for him throughout
Yeah.
his life, especially in the novels.
Yes.
And if you look in that same novel, when Tracy's father, Draco, first reveals what he knows about Bond, he tells him, his commander, James Bond, you have a decoration called CMG. You are a member, an important member of Her Majesty's Secret Service. You've been taken off your usual duties and you're on temporary assignment abroad. Then when Draco wants to discuss Tracy with Bond, he asks Bond to keep the conversation confidential. I mean, he uses an old Greek term for secrecy, herkos ondanton. I'm sure I screwed that one up. Herkos ondanton. I'm not exactly sure how to say it. I apologize. Fleming gives us this about Bond's response. Bond shrugged. If you tell me secrets that affect my profession, I'm afraid I shall have to pass them on. How do you build trust on that? In other words, Bond makes it clear that anything touching his work for the Secret Service isn't his to keep private. It belongs to the company.
Yeah.
And in the movie, he has to keep his work private, even from Tracy. So it's hard for him to build trusting relationships with this overhead. Because if you tell me this, I got to tell my bosses. And then if I know this, I can't tell you.
All right, let's continue why the book Bond feels more modern. Let's look at ambiguous morality, which, of course, we see in every spy movie virtually. But movie Bond traditionally works in a clearer moral universe. So, yeah, you have the ambiguity, but they quickly disseminate that and eliminate it because you know who is on the good side, right? So the movie Bond,
Yeah,
again, is
that's true.
far more clear in this moral world. So stop the villain, save the world. Boom, you're a hero.
That's pretty simple.
Yeah. Fleming's Bond in the books often feels trapped in morally gray territory. He kills people, manipulates others, and serves institutions that he does not fully trust. Modern audiences are far more accustomed to anti heroes, ethical ambiguity, and distrust of institutions. So, Fleming's original Bond in the books feels modern. And Fleming obsessively describes ordinary habits, meals, drinks, cigarettes, hotel rooms, hangovers, fatigue. At first glance, this seems indulgent, but it serves a purpose. It grounds Bond in physical reality. And Fleming was a master at doing that.
Oh,
His
yes, he was.
things using this kind of watch, this kind of coffee, this kind of whatever. Movie Bond orders a martini and he looks effortlessly cool. Book Bond orders or prepares food in meticulous ways, often interpreted as a calming element. He has a routine, and that routine is what he relies on.
There's a really good example of this in From Russia with Love, the novel.
Okay.
Right? Bond fixates on breakfast and coffee. And this mundane ritual almost becomes a psychological recovery for him because he's
Yeah,
so
that's what I'm saying.
meticulous,
Yeah.
and especially with the way that Fleming describes it.
Yeah. It
Now,
almost becomes a comfort thing.
yeah,
Calm
and
him
we get
down.
a bit of this when M comes to Bond's house in the movie Live and Let Die. That whole scene when Bond's making coffee for M.
Yeah.
He has that fancy espresso machine,
Yeah.
and it gives him a ritual for making coffee.
Yeah.
It isn't exactly what's in the novel, but it's about the only time in the movies that we see this out of James Bond when it comes to food.
Yeah, that's close. It is close. And I
Yeah.
love M's comment.
Is that all it does?
Is that all it does? It's like
Is that all it does?
the coffee machine. All right. I think this is deeply relatable. People cope through routine. So Fleming's Bond is more ordinary than our movie Bond. And today, I think, again, people can relate to that more.
Yeah, and
So-
I think in defense of the movies, I don't think it's all of the movies. I think that the shift with Timothy Dalton and Daniel Craig definitely did get us closer to what we're talking about. Let's give a shout out to our listeners who've given us feedback.
All right, we've got a few. And we, again, thank you for giving us feedback, whether you love the show or not, whatever. We love when we hear from you. Here's one from Randy Hankins on Our Man Flint, our episode. Great episode, Dan and Top. Good job. Here's another one from Mark Knight, who's been with us for years. We love Mark Knight's feedback. Great episode, guys. And I have this film on DVD. Thanks, guys. Again, talking about Our Man Flint. We want to thank Stuart Bassinger for nominating Cracking the Code of Spy Movies to the Golden Bullets Awards for podcast. Thank you very much, Stuart.
Yes, thank you,
We appreciate
Stuart.
that. We love it. We love it. We love it. And we want to thank Gary Huntress 6871, who made a comment on the invisible scene that explains the whole spy movie. He said, I'm 5 minutes into this and you said the same thing 10 times. Thank you. Huntress, we've examined it. We're going to take your feedback and make adjustments, right?
Well, and actually, we like that kind of feedback. If there's something we're doing that's annoying you, let us know and we can try to correct it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another one from Randy Hankins on our summer campy 6 summer spy movies episode. Another cool episode, he said. Thank you, Randy. All right, thanks, guys. We appreciate you listening.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so let's look at a few examples from the novels. And based on the concept that the movie Bond becomes a symbol, while the book Bond stays a person, a human. So, as the movie franchise grew, Bond had to serve many roles.
Yeah, getting famous stinks.
Action hero, sex symbol, national icon, a global brand. That pushed him towards abstraction, towards a concept rather than a person. In other words, he became James Bond, in quotes, more than a psychologically specific individual human being. Fleming's book Bond never fully escapes his humanity. He
Yeah,
can,
and you lose that in the movies.
you do. In the books, he could be unpleasant, snobbish, misogynist, impulsive. Those flaws don't make him admirable, but they do make him understandable as a person shaped by his era and experiences. Again, Fleming did not write Bond to be likable. He said that himself. Modern audiences are often more interested in flawed protagonists than idealized heroes, though the superhero focus and interest is huge today.
Yeah, they make a lot of movie with those, although they've kind of that's starting to taper a little bit because they've overdone it.
Yeah, but that's a little different angle. We live in a post anti-hero storytelling world. Characters like those in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, The Bourne Identity, and well-done television dramas have trained viewers to expect emotional complexity as part of the story brand.
Yeah, but Fleming's Bond already had that complexity.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Now let's look at a few moments that show how different Fleming's Bond really is. All right, back to Casino Royale. First, Daniel Craig movies became popular partly because they moved back towards Fleming, like we've been saying. Casino Royale 2006 restored physical vulnerability, emotional consequence, and psychological scars. That was huge. Craig's
Yes.
Bond bleeds, he grieves, and he struggles with attachment. That felt fresh because audiences had become accustomed to invulnerable blockbuster heroes. Again, though today the hero movies are popular, like Spider Man, Superman, and all that, but those are different kinds of heroes. Even Craig's Bond remains more cinematic than literary. Fleming's version is quieter and more internally conflicted.
Well, Dan, I've often said in our episodes, I talk about the fact that I didn't like what Daniel Craig did with Bond. I stopped recognizing him. I mean, I got it in Casino Royale, but it changed over the other movies. But it might just be because, the movies weren't based on the books anymore after Casino Royale.
Yeah,
That one was. And so it could just be that where they took it felt different than Fleming's
yes.
did.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, they got some of these characteristics that Fleming had, but maybe they took it a little off of the axis that Fleming had it on.
Yeah. Again, I think they did a good job of trying to get back to Fleming, even beyond Casino Royale. But yeah, they didn't have the Fleming content anymore. So that always makes writing an issue. But
Well, you need good writers for that, and I'll
yeah,
stop
you
there.
constantly need good writing for any of this stuff. Let's look at Thunderbolt quickly. Bond spends significant time simply recovering from overwork at a health clinic. Imagine a modern blockbuster opening with a hero on medical leave for exhaustion. Fleming did that in 1961. I mean,
Yeah, they pushed it a little later in the movie. And even in the novel, You Only Live Twice, we see Bond is grieving Tracy's death. He's mentally unraveling, and he's sent on what is essentially a suicide mission. And he feels less like an invincible agent and more like a man drifting through trauma. And these moments are messy, they're human, and they're psychologically grounded.
Now, we know the Thunderball movie starts off with James Bond at Shrublands recovering, but he's still cool, the cool James Bond doing all kinds of sophisticated things, identifying certain marks on guys' arms and stuff like that, and understanding the connections between villains already. And
Yeah, he
in it,
doesn't look exhausted.
yeah, and then he gets Patricia Fearing, the assistant there at Shrublands in that steam room thing there. We all remember that scene. And even Never Say Never Again treats his recovery at the spa kind of flippantly. So, yeah, they put it in the movie, but certainly not like in the book. All right.
Yes, it feels different.
Why did the movies move away from this version of James Bond? Because cinema rewards clarity and charisma. Producers need a repeatable franchise hero, an escapist environment, international appeal, and a classic look. A brooding, exhausted civil servant was harder to sell globally than this glamorous super spy.
Yeah.
So the movies naturally amplified style, confidence, humor, gadgets, spectacle, sexual encounters, and so on. All right.
So our premise here is that the book Bond feels more relevant today than the pre-Daniel Craig James Bond. And why is that? And I think it's because modern life is full of pressures that resemble his inner world more than the cinematic image. I
Yeah.
mean, there's the burnout, isolation, performance anxiety that we've talked about, fear of irrelevance, and he can put different emotions into different buckets. And he can compartmentalize which emotion has to come out
Yeah.
and then ignore the other buckets.
Yeah.
So Fleming's Bond is essentially a high-functioning professional, and he's trying to maintain his identity, but he's got to do it under extreme stress.
Yeah.
And that sounds a lot less like a superhero and more like many people's real lives.
Yeah.
We aspire for some of his skills, but we can sure relate from a psychological perspective of what he's going through.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is a paradox of Bond, and I think we're pointing this out. And here's what I think is the paradox. The movies made Bond immortal. Well, mostly.
Mostly. Until the end.
The books made Bond human. And over time, the human version may have aged better emotionally. Look, the movie fantasy is great. We all love it. But the
Yep.
books give us something different. A man who's hurting, but keeps going anyway. That feels real. There's a vulnerability without self pity. He keeps functioning even when damaged. That balance is hard to write and hard to portray, but in the book, it's done.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I also think you get it in the novels, The Ipcris File, and The Spy Who Came In From the Cold as well. So
Yeah.
it's hard to portray and hard to write, and you've got to be a skilled writer, like all three of these writers have been in writing
Yeah.
these novels.
Yeah. Now, who's the Bond we need now? The classical cinematic Bond remains enormously entertaining. It has been pure escapism for people for decades and decades. The fantasy still works, and in general, we've all loved it. But Fleming's Bond may speak more directly to contemporary life. Bond is competent but tired, dangerous but lonely, successful yet emotionally spent, a man performing strength while quietly carrying damage. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
Do
I
we
mean,
need that?
and that complexity there feels less like escapism and more like a recognition for us. So perhaps
Yeah.
the question isn't which Bond is better, but which Bond feels true to the moment we're living in now.
Yeah. Yeah. Which Bond is grounded in today's world? And because that's important. Right now, Ian Fleming's flawed, haunted, original James Bond survives because he can be reinvented. But if you go back to Fleming's novels, you discover that the original Bond was not a perfect fantasy man. He's a lonely government assassin with expensive tastes, bad habits, emotional scars, and a talent for surviving situations that should probably have killed him.
Let me wrap this up here. You're saying he was complicated. He was a very complex human being.
Human being, yes.
Exactly. And I think if we take this to today, Ian Fleming's flawed, haunted original you talk about is more like us than any Hollywood icon could be. He isn't just a spy. He's a professional trying to survive his own life. And I think it brings us to the big question that's overhanging James Bond right now. How is Amazon going to handle this legacy? Will they give us the invincible super spy of the past movies or the exhausted, relatable human from the pages? And only time's going to tell. But the blueprint for the perfect modern Bond has been sitting on our bookshelves since 1953.
Yeah, what Amazon does right now is gigantic. The first step they take, whether it's relating to the modern audiences, which they kind of have to do. So I'm thinking they're going to go more towards a Fleming book kind of Bond because they have to create and attract new audiences. Or are they going to go back to the movie extravaganzas? I think it's going to be Fleming's Bond.
All right, so let's wrap this up. You, our listeners, what do you think? Is the literary Bond more compelling than the cinematic one to you? Do you prefer that larger-than-life movie Bond or the more vulnerable book Bond? Which version feels more believable to you? And which Bond novel best captures the character at his most human form? And what do you want to see out of Amazon as their first James Bond movie?
Yeah, so let us know in our discussion on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Spy Movie Navigator. All right, if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to Cracking the Code of Spy Movies, where we go beyond the surface of spy cinema and uncover what's really going on beneath the tuxedo. Because every spy movie has secrets, and we help you find them. And hey, share our show with a fellow Bond fan or spy movie fan. All right, until next time, watch closely, think deeply, and remember, in espionage, trust no one except us.
Thanks for listening.